The man kneeling by the bed was meticulous, his focus absolute as he lined the inside of a steel ankle cuff with a strip of soft suede. Caleb watched him from a hazy, half-conscious state, the scene so jarringly familiar it felt like a dream bleeding into reality. Julian's dark hair fell across his brow as he worked, his expression a mask of intense concentration. The memory of a gunshot, a falling, of a final thought. Will I become a ghost too? Dissolved like smoke. This was real. This was 9 years ago. He was back. The realization settled not with relief, but with a cold, hard clarity. A second chance wasn't a gift. It was a battlefield. As Julian reached for his ankle, Caleb reacted, not by pulling away, but by moving forward. He lifted his foot and pressed it firmly onto Julian's shoulder, the gesture both an anchor and a challenge. A slow, provocative smile spread across his lips as he met Julian's startled, icy gaze. He wondered aloud, his voice a low drawl, if Julian planned on fiddling with that thing all night or if he was going to get on with it. He dared him, then. If Julian truly had any nerve, he should prove it. He should make it so Caleb couldn't leave this bed, couldn't go anywhere at all. Less of the theatrics, more of the action. The room, a spacious master suite in their downtown penthouse, was cast in the warm, golden glow of a bedside lamp, turning the fine chain linking the cuffs into a glittering web. For a moment, Julian's body went rigid, his eyes darkening with a familiar, stormy possessiveness. Then, in a sudden, fluid motion, he seized both of Caleb's ankles, flipping him onto his back. The weight of him was a mountain, pinning Caleb to the plush mattress, the raw, untamed current of his anger a palpable force in the air. Julian's voice was a low growl, asking if Caleb had any idea what he was saying. Caleb met his furious gaze without flinching, his own smile widening. He told him that if Julian left him with even an ounce of strength, he might just find his way into someone else's bed. He might whisper another man's name, share a post-coital cigarette in another man's arms, and listen as that man thanked him for his graciousness in letting Caleb go. The words were a lit match to gasoline. The dam of Julian's restraint shattered, unleashing a torrent of fury that consumed them both. Caleb became a ship tossed on a violent sea, eventually finding himself wrecked and utterly spent on the solitary island that was Julian. Later, as his fingers traced the hard, raised line of the scar that ran across Julian's chest, a permanent reminder of the day Julian, at 18, had taken a knife for him, a new plan began to form. The old scar was a testament to a debt Caleb could never repay, a debt that had festered into this toxic, suffocating dynamic. He would not let it happen again. As Julian's breathing evened out, his head resting on Caleb's chest, Caleb announced 3 things. First, Julian was to take Caleb's phone and transfer $800 to himself. Second, he was to carry Caleb to the shower. Third, he needed to change the sheets. Julian, a top-tier hedge fund manager who certainly didn't need the money, skipped straight to the second step. Caleb let himself be lifted, then stopped him, asking if he wasn't curious about the specific amount. Julian paused, then put him down, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He picked up the phone and did as he was told. Caleb watched the transaction confirmation pop up and explained coolly that it was a performance bonus. Julian's fingers tightened on the phone, the knuckles turning white. He demanded to know what Caleb was playing at, what he was being treated as. Caleb replied that, for now, he was still his boyfriend. But from that day forward, a new scoring system was in effect. His performance would be compensated accordingly, with no upper limit. Today, while he had successfully kept Caleb bedridden, he had also ignored certain requests mid-act, hence the modest sum. The air in the room grew heavy, the pressure dropping as Julian's face turned into a pale, unreadable mask. Caleb, ignoring the oppressive atmosphere, simply repeated his request for a shower. Julian remained frozen, his dark eyes fixed on Caleb. He asked if this was Caleb's way of trying to break up with him. Caleb assured him that wasn't his intention. Not yet. This was a way to make him take their relationship seriously. The day he performed and didn't get paid, that would be the day they were truly over. He saw the color drain completely from Julian's face and added, with a deceptively light tone, that it wasn't a one-way street. The money he earned would act as chips. Once Julian saved up enough, he could make demands of his own, even unreasonable ones. Julian's lips barely moved as he asked for an example. Caleb listed a few possibilities. Knowing Caleb's phone passcode, having him actively reject other men, maybe even something more risque for the office. Julian cut him off coldly, stating that Caleb should do those things without needing a transaction. The gloom that had settled over him when he'd crashed Caleb's business lunch last year was back. So Caleb raised the stakes. He asked about marriage. The tremor that went through Julian's body was unmistakable, like a pine tree shaking off a heavy coat of snow. Caleb smiled faintly. He promised that if the chips were sufficient, he would stay with Julian forever. He would build up Julian's confidence with every transfer, creating a foundation so strong it could withstand any of Julian's falls. He would fix the paranoia, soothe the insecurity, and rewrite their tragic ending. This time, there would be no regrets. After a long board meeting, Caleb sent Julian a text asking what he was doing. The reply was instantaneous, reporting that he was watching the market. Julian was always disciplined during trading hours, largely because he had Caleb's schedule and knew he was also working. He then asked if the meeting was over and how it had gone. Caleb ignored the question. Instead, he sent a picture of his lower half, the sharp line of his tailored trousers, a designer belt cinching his waist, his long legs casually crossed. The accompanying text was simple. He was in the mood, and Julian should come to his office. He calculated the travel time from their penthouse to his midtown office and told his secretary to push his next appointment forward. When Julian walked in, Caleb was in the middle of a vigorous handshake with a potential investor, both men smiling. Julian's face went from neutral to a thunderous slate gray. Caleb just smiled at the investor, reassuring him that it was fine, Julian was with him, and they should continue. Julian said nothing, taking a seat beside Caleb's desk. A clean scent of shower gel, shaving foam, and minty mouthwash followed him. He had prepared. Caleb, however, gave him no acknowledgement. He gestured to a leather armchair in the corner of the vast office and told Julian to wait for him over there. Julian's jaw tightened, but after a tense moment, he rose and moved to the designated spot. The half-hour meeting stretched into an hour and a half. The entire time, Julian sat stone-faced, his gaze locked on Caleb. Caleb acted as if he didn't notice, continuing his animated discussion with the investor. It was only when Julian finally broke his stare, looking down to light up his phone screen, that Caleb decided to wrap things up. The moment the investor was out the door, Caleb was slammed against his own mahogany desk. Julian's movements were rougher than usual, pent-up frustration making him forgo any gentleness. But before anything could truly begin, Caleb placed a hand flat against Julian's chest, stopping him. He apologized with a serene smile, explaining that he had another meeting. Maybe they could just call it a day? Julian's voice was a low snarl, asking if Caleb was playing games with him. Caleb's smile didn't waver. He pointed out that Julian, with his obsessive tracking, knew perfectly well whether he had another meeting and how important it was. They were locked in a stalemate, Julian pressing down, Caleb resisting. Finally, Caleb hooked his arms around Julian's neck, pulling him closer. He offered a kiss as a compromise. Julian didn't move. Caleb didn't push, simply saying it was his loss if he didn't want it. That spurred him into action. The kiss was soft, then deep, and just as it was tipping into something more desperate, Caleb pushed him away gently, reminding him about the meeting. Julian straightened up, his chest heaving as he took a deep breath. Caleb casually picked up his phone and sent a transfer before sitting up properly. Julian stared at his screen, his voice stiff as he asked why this payment had an extra zero. Caleb explained it was because he'd enjoyed it. 2 minutes of that kiss were better than 2 hours of their earlier, more combative session. He added that Julian had been very obedient today, which earned him a bonus. Julian said nothing, his jawline a rigid line of suppressed emotion. As Caleb checked his reflection in his phone's camera, Julian's gaze followed his every move. Caleb, sensing the shift, deliberately traced the outline of his own lips, his finger dipping slightly between them. He saw Julian's throat work, saw the undisguised hunger in his eyes. Just as Julian took a half-step forward, Caleb looked up, feigning innocence, and asked if he needed something else. A large hand landed on his thigh, fingers hooking into his belt loop. Julian's voice was raspy when he suggested Caleb skip the meeting. Caleb agreed instantly, his tone cheerful but with an undercurrent of ice. He said that was fine, but Julian would have to return the $8,000 first. He reached for Julian's phone, but Julian snatched it away, clutching it behind his back. Caleb explained that the bonus was for his good behavior, and wanting to renege on their agreement voided it. A kiss was certainly not worth $8,000. Julian stood his ground, refusing to return the money or the phone. When Caleb asked if he was still planning to stay, Julian's resolve seemed to crumble. He said he would go home and wait for him. And then he left. It was the first time he had ever voluntarily walked away, the first time he had chosen restraint. The high school reunion was held at a lavish downtown hotel ballroom. Caleb, knowing this kind of event was a breeding ground for Julian's insecurities, made a conscious effort to keep a polite distance from everyone, engaging in brief, surface-level conversations. Julian seemed calmer than usual, his expression placid even when an overenthusiastic former classmate draped an arm over Caleb's shoulders. The knot of anxiety in Caleb's stomach began to loosen. The training was working. Near the end of the night, Alex, Caleb's closest friend from their boarding school days, arrived late. Spotting Caleb, he strode over, complaining loudly about his delayed flight from London and insisting Caleb join him at the buffet. Alex was the only one there Caleb would have considered his best man. As they filled their plates, Alex's voice dropped. He asked Caleb how he was still with that guy. Caleb's smile froze. He glanced over his shoulder. Julian was out of earshot. Alex pressed on, saying it was fine for a fling, but Caleb shouldn't get seriously involved. Caleb's reply was clipped. He told Alex it was serious. Alex scoffed, stuffing a forkful of pasta into his mouth. He knew Caleb felt he owed Julian, he said, but his family's financial support over the years was more than enough. They had helped Julian leapfrog social classes. What more did he want? A loud crash from behind them cut him off. Julian was crouched by the dessert tower, a pistachio macaron smashed to pieces on the marble floor at his feet. A waiter hurried over. Caleb took a step towards him, but Alex grabbed his arm, remarking that this is what happens when you try to force someone into a world where they don't belong. A cold fury settled over Caleb. He told Alex his time overseas had pickled his personality with a nasty, elitist brine. He suggested, his voice dangerously low, that before Alex spoke again, he should check who the private equity titan his own father was currently sucking up to was. Alex's face went blank, then his eyes widened in disbelief. Caleb shook off his friend's hand and went to Julian, asking if he was okay. Julian looked up, his face a calm mask. He just said he lost his grip on it. Caleb offered to have the hotel send some of the desserts to their home, but Julian declined. His gaze flickered to Alex, then back to Caleb, asking if he was done talking. Caleb nodded and took his hand, saying they should go home. Julian's hand was shockingly cold. He tried to pull away once, a slight, reflexive motion, before letting Caleb entwine their fingers and stuff their joined hands into his coat pocket. Caleb caught a fleeting shadow of deep melancholy cross Julian's face, and a strange unease pricked at him. He had defended him, clarified their status. What could be wrong? In the parking garage, as they waited for the valet, Caleb decided to make a public statement. He told Julian to kiss him. Julian's hand tensed in his. He murmured that they could kiss at home. Caleb scoffed softly at his timid little monster who was only brave in private. He insisted, here and now. When Julian still hesitated, Caleb played his trump card, whispering a figure, 100,000. Julian's gaze flickered. He leaned in and pressed his lips to Caleb's. It was a brief, chaste kiss. Just as Caleb was about to deepen it, Julian pulled back, taking his hand from Caleb's as well. He said he didn't like public displays, that it wasn't appropriate. The man who had once made him wear a vibrating device to a gala was now lecturing him on propriety. It was so absurd Caleb didn't even bother to argue. In the car, Julian sat in silence, the cold light of his phone screen illuminating his stark features. He was staring at the transaction history. He finally turned off the screen and looked at Caleb, his expression uncharacteristically serious. He asked how much more he needed to save before he could make a request. The tension in Caleb's shoulders eased. So that was it. He was impatient to cash in. Caleb felt a secret smile tug at his lips. He was impatient too. The custom Cartier rings he'd had made after secretly measuring Julian's finger should be ready soon. He told Julian the amount for the forever option. $2 million. The exact price of the rings. Julian's voice was heavy when he calculated the remaining sum. A little over $1 million left. Caleb assured him it would be soon, maybe in another 2 months. Enough time to plan the perfect proposal. He leaned in, reminding Julian that kisses were free. This time, Julian understood, catching his chin and pulling him into a deep, lingering kiss that tasted of wine and want. A month later, Julian's strange detachment grew more pronounced. Caleb came home late after a deep-tissue physical therapy session for his tense shoulders and found Julian on the sofa, laptop open. Hearing the door, Julian closed it and asked if he wanted a late supper, saying he'd made soup. The warm light of the apartment softened the sharp angles of his face. On impulse, Caleb asked why Julian wasn't asking where he'd been. Julian replied calmly that Caleb had texted him saying he'd be late. It was true, but the text had been vague. As Caleb unbuttoned his shirt to get ready for a shower, he froze. The therapist's work had left a constellation of reddish marks across his shoulders and neck, stark against his pale skin. His scalp prickled as he looked at Julian, who was now staring at the marks, his face devoid of expression. Caleb stammered an explanation about his neck being sore, that he'd gone for a massage. He felt a bizarre sense of relief at Julian's blank reaction, and a twisted part of him felt a flicker of anticipation, waiting for the jealousy, the anger. But it never came. Julian just asked if it felt better now, and offered to help him wash up. His voice was even, his stance relaxed. Caleb felt a profound sense of confusion and told him he was fine. Later, as Julian dried his hair, the silence in the apartment was deafening. It was the quiet of a normal couple, a peace he had been striving for, but now it felt unnerving. Why wasn't he questioning him? He turned and pulled Julian down onto the sofa, straddling his lap. He asked if he wanted to have sex. It had been a long time since Julian had initiated anything. Julian's throat moved, but he shook his head, saying Caleb's neck was sore and they should wait. Caleb retorted, asking what his neck had to do with his ass, and started to push down his own sweatpants. A firm hand stopped him. Julian told him he had some work to do. An unnamed emotion surged through Caleb. He stared down at him, his voice hard, pointing out that the U market was closed and the Asian markets weren't open yet. What work could he possibly have? Julian just pulled his pants back up and gave him a soft, placating kiss, promising they would tomorrow. He told Caleb to go to bed first. Julian never came to bed that night. Just before dawn, he slipped in, ruffled the sheets on his side, and then went to the kitchen to start breakfast. Caleb lay with his eyes open, watching him, his heart a cold stone in his chest. The next day, Caleb had his driver take him to the Wall Street address of Julian's hedge fund. He had to know what was going on. The firm's managing partner looked haggard, explaining that Julian had resigned. The news hadn't been made public yet to avoid client panic, but the handover was nearly complete. The world tilted, a buzzing sound filling Caleb's ears. Why would he quit? It had never happened in his past life. A terrifying thought bloomed in his mind. Was it possible Julian had been reborn, too? That he remembered everything? That his recent placid, detached behavior wasn't healing, but a quiet, methodical preparation for the end? Just like that day, when he'd waited calmly in his white shirt for Caleb to leave before stepping out of the window. Caleb's hands trembled as he raced home, fumbling the keypad entry to their apartment again and again. The door swung open from the inside. Julian stood there barefoot, roused from a nap, his hair sleep-mussed. His drowsy confusion cleared when he saw the raw panic on Caleb's face, replaced by instant alarm. He scanned the hallway behind Caleb, then checked Caleb from head to toe, asking what had happened. A sob caught in Caleb's throat. He choked out the words he should have said 9 years ago, the answer to the question Julian had asked right before the end. He told him he'd been burned by the cigarette ash. Julian's tense expression softened. He knelt, searching Caleb's hands, his clothes, for a burn that didn't exist. When Caleb pointed to a clear patch of skin on his forearm and said it was there, Julian didn't question him. He simply leaned down and pressed a soft, healing kiss to the spot. He asked if it still hurt. Caleb nodded, then shook his head, tears finally spilling over. He asked, his voice trembling, if it had hurt Julian back then, when the kidnappers. Julian cut him off, his voice firm, telling him not to bring up the past. But Caleb couldn't stop. The terror of losing him again was too great. He clung to Julian, confessing that he'd never really wanted to break up, that he just wanted him to change, to be less extreme. How could Julian have been so cruel as to leave him? A strong arm wrapped around his waist, pulling him into a tight embrace. Julian's voice rumbled against his chest, a deep, resonant vibration. He knew Caleb hadn't wanted to break up, and he knew that Caleb was trapped. Caleb froze. The Julian in front of him couldn't possibly know that. He pushed away, pinning Julian to the floor, demanding to know what he was talking about, why he had quit his job. Julian avoided his eyes, asking instead how much he would get paid for this performance. The question was so jarring, Caleb could only stare. He told Julian not to be absurd, he didn't need the money. But Julian insisted that he needed the 2 million. A cold, dreadful realization washed over Caleb. They had been working towards the same goal forever, but with entirely different intentions. He had been saving up for their wedding rings. Julian had been saving up for his escape. Caleb grabbed Julian's phone from the nightstand. His contact name was pinned to the top of the message list. And next to his name, for words that stopped his heart, final 30,000 needed. A phone call from his father interrupted their standoff, a summons to a family dinner, with a specific instruction to bring Julian. To Caleb's shock, Julian agreed to go. At the tense dinner, Caleb's stepmother tried to corner him into a conversation about her own son's career prospects. Through the tedious exchange, he saw Julian head upstairs. His heart clenched. He excused himself and followed, finding the door to his father's study ajar. Inside, his father threw a stack of papers onto the desk. He was sneering at Julian, calling his parents manipulative for orchestrating their heroic rescue just before they died from pre-existing illnesses. He accused Julian of being an ungrateful parasite who had spent years using guilt to chain Caleb to him, making him a laughingstock. The words were poison darts. The door creaked open as Caleb pushed it. His father's face hardened when he saw him, and he gestured to the papers on the desk, Julian's parents' medical records. Caleb's laugh was cold and sharp. He told his father he was the real villain, always shifting blame to soothe a conscience he didn't possess. He stated clearly that nothing had ever been forced. From the very beginning, he was the one who had initiated everything, who had begged Julian for his affection. His father raised a hand to strike him, but Julian caught his wrist, his voice calm as he asked for a moment alone with Caleb. Caleb begged Julian not to listen, to just go home with him. But Julian gently pried his clinging fingers away, one by one. He opened his phone. A chime sounded, a notification of a transfer, the final payment. Julian looked at him, and for the first time in days he smiled. It was a smile of heartbreaking relief. He said they were even now. He told Caleb he was free, and that they should never see each other again. Julian vanished. Again. This time, everyone rushed to congratulate Caleb on his freedom. His friends, his business partners, they all spoke of Julian as a manipulative social climber, a potential abuser. Whispering about bruises they'd imagined on Caleb's wrists, about the high-collared shirts he sometimes wore. In the sterile white of a hospital room, recovering from what the doctors called a stress-induced collapse, Caleb listened to Alex recount how he had helped Caleb's father orchestrate Julian's departure. The buzzing of their voices was like a cloud of flies. He finally looked at them, his voice hollow, and asked why they all assumed he was a victim. Didn't they consider that they were just jealous? That a boy from nowhere had outshone them all? His tolerance was never about guilt or coercion. The answer was always much simpler. He loved him. He was just never very good at showing it. He had been given a second chance to make it tangible, to prove it, and had only managed to architect the same ending through a different, more convoluted path. But there was one crucial difference. This time, Julian was still alive. Caleb squeezed his fist, the 4 needle in the back of his hand pressing into the vein, a small, sharp pain. He had gotten sick because of Julian, and Julian would have to take responsibility for him.